after I signed all these indoctrination statements, I call this my Men in Black moment because it was really quite radical, and all the things I had to sign. He said, okay, our mission here is to collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology discipline called remote viewing. We're essentially asking you to volunteer to be a psychic spy. I'm sitting there thinking, he's telling me there's a line item in the federal budget to pay to teach people how to do ESP. There is no way in hell I'm not going to do this.
There is a list of things the United States government has officially trained people to do that most people don't know about. PaulHSmith is on that list. He is a former US Army major, a decorated intelligence officer, and one of the original members of the Army's classified remote viewing program, Stargate, where for years the government paid him to sit and attempt to perceive locations, objects, and events using nothing but his mind. You could call him a psychic spy. He is also a philosopher by training, a published author, and one of the more thoughtful voices on where consciousness ends and the unexplained begins. I've wanted to talk to Paul for years, and at Contact in the Desert, I finally got a chance to sit down with him. Welcome to the show.
So we're here to talk a lot about remote viewing today and what people call the woo. But I want to know, before you got into this stuff, who were you? What was your outlook on the world?
Oh, wow. How long do we have? Well, I grew up in southern Nevada and up in Wyoming, the mountains and stuff. In the summers, I milked cows in the cool of the mountains. In the winters, I was down Boulder City, Nevada, going to school and all that kind of stuff, right? And I was interested in a lot of things. I did some hunting and, fishing and that kind of thing, and very interested in science fiction. But I was a bit more of an intellectual, I think, than many of my school chums. But nothing particularly special at that time. Now, I later went on a church mission for the Mormon Church to Switzerland, which was awesome. I love Switzerland even today. I still love the place. And then I came back and got married and didn't have a career. I was going to go to, I was at Brigham Young University, wanted to learn Arabic and become a specialist in Middle Eastern studies, and they didn't have a program.
Okay.
Yeah. So my then wife suggested I become an Arab linguist in the Army, which is what I did. And I did that and then ended up going to officer candidate school and getting assigned to Germany. And I'm cutting to the chase, obviously. And then at that point, after I'd been to Germany and came back and gone through the next level of schooling, I ended up at Fort Meade, Maryland. And I was working a Mideast desk job as an analyst job, except it was mostly just a glorified paper shuffler, because we'd get reports in and send them to the people who wanted them. We were just going like a clearinghouse. It was tedious as heck. That didn't really play a role in this, except it made me eager to find something else, but I didn't have to look far. I had never put the words remote and viewing together. But I had been interested in ESP. A lot of the science fiction I read had to do with ESP. Andre Norton, her psychic cats, and Zena Henderson, and she had this group she called the People, that were aliens that looked just like humans, except they were psychic, right? Yeah, and so on like that. And so I was fascinated by this ESP stuff. And then one of my schoolmates, a young lady who actually ended up being a lieutenant colonel in the Army, much to my surprise, did a science fair project that involved the ESP cards. They sometimes call them Zener cards. Wavy line, star, square, those kind of things. Total failure. Nobody in that experiment had anything that looked like any kind of success. I found out later it's probably the worst way to develop or test for ESP, but oh well, right? So total failure. I became a bit of a skeptic, although I still like to read those books. Well, we get up to Fort Meade. I move in next door to a guy named Fred Atwater. He goes by Skip these days, Skip Atwater, across the street from a guy named Tom McNair. And they were kind of strange folks because they're living in military quarters with Captain Atwater and Captain McNair on their door, but they never wore uniforms. They always wore civilian clothes, and Tom had a full beard. Now, it isn't unusual in the intelligence world for military people to wear civilian clothes, but usually not so much in garrison, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, usually they don't live on an installation if they're in a civilian closed position, right? So anyway, so this is a little strange, so I couldn't get him to tell me what they did. And one day I was asking Tom, we were at a little party he had in his backyard. We were having Maryland crabs, crab cook. And I asked Tom, and I'm going to call him Skip. So what do you guys do? And Skip says, well, we can't tell you. I said, well, I know that, but at least what intelligence discipline do you do? Is it signals intelligence, human intelligence? Is it imagery intelligence? And they looked at each other and said, none of them. I go, what do you mean none of them? That's all there is. Nothing else. Oh, whatever. I said, well, do you do at least a little traveling or something? Do you do some traveling? Because I thought that might give me a clue. And they started saying, no, well, sort of. Had no idea what that meant. So one day they came and knocked on my door. They'd seen my artwork on the walls. I'd majored in art at BYU when I was not trying to get into Middle Eastern studies. And they saw my art and they said, we think you might be good at what we do. And I said, what do you do? We still can't tell you. What? How do I know? And they said, look, we're going to give you a battery of tests. If you score where we think you will, then we'll read you on and you can choose to volunteer or not. And so I did that. Apparently I scored, and I was over sitting in the office with Tom with his beard and his button-down shirt and his Levi's, back room of this old ramshackle building. He says, after I signed all these indoctrination statements, I call this my Men in Black moment because it was really quite radical, and all the things I had to sign. He said, okay, and our mission here is to collect intelligence against foreign threats using a parapsychology discipline called remote viewing. We're essentially asking you to volunteer to be a psychic spy. And then he started saying, well, you have to tell me right now, you have 24-hour lights up, he's dead. Where do I sign? And he was shocked because usually people they'd read on the program and they wanted to think about it. Oh, no, what does this mean? What's it going to do to my career? I'm sitting there thinking, as he's reading me on, I'm thinking, he's telling me there's a line item in the federal budget to pay to teach people how to do ESP. There is no way in hell I'm not going to do this. So that's the backstory.
That's really cool. It's almost like the reading all the ESP-related sci-fi and stuff was kind of teeing you up for you.
It was. It's like I was prepared.
Yeah.
It was. I feel like it was maybe more in the synchronicity, like the universe was recruiting me before I even knew I was being recruited, I mean, that sounds like magical thinking. A psychologist would call it that. Psychologists would call it that. But I feel like there was a real there to that. So,
and I hear that a lot from people in this subject. You kind of get these weird experiences that are kind of almost poetic, I'm really curious what you said about how they thought you would be good at remote viewing because of your creativity. Can you speak about that a little bit? Is it just that creativity is better?
So, there's no way to tell right out of the box whether somebody's going to be good at it or not. They do know that just about anybody can do it, but how well you can do it is, of course, the variable that we don't have a value for, right? So they did find that people who were a certain kind of a profile had more success. They were looking for intelligence officers who had, of course, good report cards, who were well settled in their careers, qualified, done everything they're supposed to do, plus have some kind of creative abilities, right? So they were looking for people with some studio art background, like drawing or painting or something like that, or people who did creative writing, people who were involved in music performance, and foreign languages, people who had, of course, there's quite a few of those in the military intelligence world, but still, foreign language is an indicator as well. Well, they found out that I was fluent in German and had been trained in Arabic and Hebrew, that I majored in art at BYU and I illustrated books and things, that I'd been playing guitar for about 20 years, and that I liked to write short stories and send them off to be rejected, right? And so they're going, we can't not try this guy out, who knows how it will turn out. But I mean, with that kind of a background, they felt like that there was pretty real potential here, whether or not it get realized or not, they didn't know. So, yeah.
That's interesting because creativity has a certain intuition to it. And I guess maybe that's what you're tapping into.
Well, I think it's more neurophysiological in a way, right? I'm going to speak simplistically here. A lot of psychologists, they just get the heebie-jeebies when you talk about right brain and left brain. That's left brain, right brain, right? I mean, because we do get oversimplified in that, right? I think they tend to react the other way, too far the other way, but I'll argue that with a psychologist. I won't worry about it right now. But there is some literal validity to the left brain being specialized for more linear kinds of tasks, and the right brain being specialized for more pattern recognition. I don't know why that's so hard to say. Anyway, pattern recognition and more global kind of tasks, right? And there's overlap, but that's okay. There needs to be. So when you're involved in creative arts, they seem to be more specialized for the right brain processing. Obviously, the left brain still needs to be involved because it interprets and language is essential, that and all that. But and the things that occur in the right brain, the remote viewing, for what they can tell, the process actually focuses more right brain than it does left brain. And so if you're already doing creative right brain things, it's more of a benign environment for the remote viewing process, I guess you could say. Yeah.
That's really interesting. So walk me through kind of what a working day at Stargate looked like.
We usually did, I'm going to talk in averages because there are different kinds of days, but we usually did one meaningful operational session every other day. They didn't want us to burn out, right? When I mean operational, I mean one that actually was real world tasking. Find out where the for current topics, right? Iranian Silkworm missiles were along the shore of the Arab, well, they call it the Persian Gulf, but yeah. But we would at least probably every other day when we weren't doing operational do just what we call a training or practice or a utility assessment target, which was a real target with real feedback, but it's one that they already knew the answer to. Because first of all, as a viewer, you would often not get feedback on the real world targets, either for a long time or ever in some cases. But in order to hone your skill and at least maintain proficiency or improve, you have to have feedbackable targets, because that's how you know how you did is you do the session and then you compare it against what you could have gotten, right? And so that's a very important preparatory thing. The thing about remote viewing is because in this case it's an unusual situation. In the military, usually you are using the equipment. As a remote viewer, you are the equipment. And so they didn't want to push us to get tired or confused or frustrated or whatever. We had an easier workload than we probably needed to have, but they didn't know what too far would be. And so, if I had some, we call them inclemencies, life problems, right? I was a single parent for 3 years of this time, and if my kid had to go to a doctor's appointment, there was no arguing with that. They just let you go, get that off your plate, so that when you came back, you could focus better. Yeah. And so from that perspective, it was a good time to be a single parent because I had flexibility, right? Yeah. But the goal was to keep you top functioning as a piece of equipment.
That must have been a strange feeling to be, because I guess with coming with feeling like a piece of equipment, you also feel like you can be replaced and maybe you don't matter as much as someone else.
The metaphor didn't go that far. Yeah, because it took us a long time to get proficient. And there was no thought about replacing us overnight, I guarantee you, right? In fact, it gave us a bit of leverage.
Okay.
Because, nobody ever threatened to quit. It's too good a job, right? But you could, we had some people who were a bit of prima donnas, and the rest of us didn't like them very well. I'm not going to name names here, but you could get away with being kind of petulant if you wanted. And, most of us were pretty level-headed folks. We'd spent time as enlisted soldiers, a bunch of us then. And so we knew what both sides of that divide was like. And
did it affect kind of how effective the practice was if you were with someone that you just didn't like working around?
Particularly in the approach we used, controlled remote viewing. We had different remote viewing disciplines or practices, but the main one we used when I was there was controlled remote viewing. You're taught to be able to set aside the stuff that's bugging you.
Okay.
In fact, my best ever remote viewing session was done when I was in the middle of a divorce. And I had a lot of stress and tension because of that. But I was able to go in, set it aside, just temporarily. You're kind of compartmentalizing, right? But this is an intentional, desirable compartmentalization. I was able to set it aside, focus on the task at hand, and do the job.
How do you zone into the signal that you need to zone into to do remote viewing? Like, what does it actually feel like for you when you're doing it?
Well, I mean, that's actually two different questions, right? And so I'll start with the first one, which is more the practical one. And the answer to that is partly we don't know, right? But the part I can do is explain the process. And so we would, in CRV, controlled remote viewing, you get a tasking number. Used to be geographic coordinates, and then it was what I'm calling a tasking number now. They switched over for reasons maybe we'll get to, I don't know. But you start with a tasking number, and then you go through the process, which I'll get to for a moment. Now, my habit back then was do a cool down, which was, I joke that we were the only military unit, probably in the entire Army, that as part of our operational equipment involved the bed. Because we used the bed for two purposes. One was extended remote viewing, which is done while you're mind awake, body asleep. And then I used it as a cool down thing. I would go lay down. I put on a mixtape that was a combination of Dolly Parton and AC/DC, and it wasn't really a cool down so much as a pep talk kind of thing, like a halftime pep talk, because you always doubt yourself in these things. You're never sure it's going to actually work. And so this was to get me up and ramped up and ready to go, right? But also caught a little bit of sleep. It's great to be able to take a short nap on government time.
No wonder you love the job.
Oh yes, it was great. Yeah, I loved it. But I'd get cooled down, and then my monitor, we usually had worked in twos. Monitor, who was also supposed to be blind to the target, in most cases was, come in and say, okay, let's go. And I go in and sit down at one end of the table, him or her at the other end. The viewer has a stack of paper and a pen, and then you get the tasking number. You write it down, and then you go through the process we're taught, and it involves going from very basic perceptual elements to increasingly complex perceptual elements all the way through to the end. The biggest problem is a thing called mental noise. Unfortunately, remote viewing is a low bandwidth situation where the signal isn't very strong. It's just coming in, very subtle, and you don't get a lot of data or impressions all at once. And so then your left brain starts analyzing, and it makes 2 and 2 equals 5, or other stuff, and it starts giving you wrong answers. And so you have to learn how to sort that out and just pick the actual signal out of it. Over time, you can sometimes develop a sense that you're getting it, and that you feel like what you're getting is actually right in some way. You don't know exactly how. Other times you sit there thinking, I'm not getting anything right. This is all garbage, but you write it down anyway. It turns out to be right, and you're done.
That's really interesting. It kind of works when you don't expect it to work as well. It's not, you don't feel magic when you're doing it. It's just a thing that's very natural. How does it make you feel when people kind of are skeptical about it now? Because it's been around for so long, right?
That's fun. I like the challenge of explaining to people why they're wrong. Now, I'm not as blunt as that usually. It depends on how respectful they are, and how objective. If I get somebody like a die-in-the-heart skeptic that absolutely rejects it, no matter what the evidence is for it, I don't mind being kind of brutal with them. But generally speaking, people are people, and they have opinions, they have ideas, and oftentimes they're based on inadequate knowledge, which most skeptics, their understanding of this is based on lack of knowledge. And so if they seem willing to at least have a civilized conversation about it, I'm happy to do that. But I find it an interesting exercise. It's kind of like a sport, as far as I'm concerned. So.
Sure. Yeah, I see what you mean. Have you ever had someone that was just a diehard skeptic that went, okay, I'll give it a go with you, I'll come and kind of study it, and their mind has been blown?
Well, I'll tell you, no, I have an example like that, except mine wasn't blown. I'll tell you the story. So I was actually, this is for Joe Rogan. He had a TV show on, I think on A&E years ago. It was called Joe Rogan Questions Everything. Yeah. So the last episode was about psychic abilities, and there was various people on there, but they brought me out to California to a set that they were using to film on, and I gave Joe hour-long, maybe tutorial on just the basics, and he was fairly attentive for that, fairly paid attention. And then when it was time to do the actual remote viewing on camera, then his personality changed. right? And he was like resistant to everything that I suggested he do. In the meantime, in the other room, there was a fairly prominent skeptic who was in there being the control subject, in which he was supposed to attempt to remote view the site and put down on the paper everything, and all that stuff. But of course, he didn't believe anything was going to happen, right? And, and Joe finally, what he comes up with is a red square, right? And that was it. A few little rambling things, and there was so much more he could have gotten. And then they take us out to the target. And it is part of a movie set. And over here was another building over to the right, and there was a red sign-shaped square on it. And Joe was blown away. He said, "Look, I got that red square. It's right there." And it's like he suddenly realized, hey, maybe there's something to this, I don't think he stayed convinced. And, and it was a pretty relatively trivial hit from my perspective, right? The skeptic, in the meantime, had sketched a building like this and put an awning on it, 2 uprights. I'm going, holy cat, you did great. He said, no, that was just an accident.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, so, skeptics like to point at people who are interested in parapsychology and paranormal stuff, and they like to say that we're victims of confirmation bias all the time. There's always confirmation bias. We're always trying to find ways that match the target, even though it isn't even close, right? Well, on more than one occasion, I have found skeptics who have suffered from their own confirmation bias. They have what's an obvious hit under circumstances in which it would be very unlikely to have been a coincidence, and yet they will find some way to explain it away. At least 2 really good cases. This was one. The other one, I was giving a talk, and one of my students had drawn, the target was a Coliseum in Tunisia, I want to say maybe it's Libya, I can't remember. But it's like the one in Rome, except intact, right? And I had a student that had done this, and then she'd sketched concentric circles that go like down, like drew little openings in it, talked about lions and stuff inside of it, and all this stuff. That wasn't in the sketches, but she had said that. And so I had showed this as part of my talk to show like how you could match, and showed the feedback photo, which is a simplistic sketch, but it was quite accurate to what the target was. And this skeptic said, well, that's just be an accident. There's, just happened to sketch something like that. I mean, that could have been anything. I said, not really. There are a number of things it could have been, but the set of those things is really small.
Sure.
And so, I mean, skeptical confirmation bias it's a thing. It is a real thing.
Yeah, it goes both ways. And that's interesting as well that she spoke about the animals in there, because that means it's not just a space thing, it's a time thing, right?
It's not just perceiving the basic elements.
That's interesting. Did you ever kind of practice the time side of it, moving around?
When we do my advanced course, so, for CRV that I teach civilianly, okay, I have a basic, intermediate, and advanced. And in the advanced course, we deal with time. We do timelines. I don't do precognitive sessions in there because it's too complicated for reasons maybe we'll get into, we'll see. But I do past, and this is one of my past targets. So I expected her to find stuff like that if she was going to get anything at all, and she did.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. You said earlier that you guys moved away from using geographic coordinates.
Yeah.
So why was that? Why did you move?
Well, for a long time, that's what we used, coordinates. And in fact, CRV used to be coordinate remote viewing, not controlled remote viewing. Ingo Swann, who's the one that developed remote viewing in the first place, and then developed the CRV approach with Hal Puthoff, who, and maybe your listeners are probably familiar with Hal. They developed this further approach, and they still use geographic coordinates as the queuing mechanism to get at the target. But the problem was there are 3 problems with that. The first problem was that the skeptics and the critics, which we had our share, within the military coming in and criticizing, they said, well, you guys aren't remote viewing at all. What you're doing is the remote viewers are memorizing what's at the end of all the coordinates, and they just know where it is when you tell them what the coordinate is.
Which is an interesting, amazing skill to have, right? If
it's more of a remote viewing would be, right? Yeah, there's practically, and when I say practically, I mean practically billions of possible coordinates, right? That actually point at discrete elements on the globe. So that attack is basically worthless, but that's okay because the way that people deal with psi and trying to prove it is you have to prove that it's not anything else.
Yeah. Well, it sounds a lot like understanding consciousness would kind of get us closer to understanding what this is, and we don't understand that, right?
Yes.
And it makes me think of someone in a panel earlier. They said to know them, as in UFOs, would mean we know ourselves, and I feel like that resonated with me, and it makes me wonder. We think of humans, and the average human has less than 2 arms and 2 legs, right? Yeah, we would describe a human as someone with 2 arms and 2 legs. So we don't really know what a human is. So based on your experience and everything you've done, kind of going outside the bounds of what people would say is being human, what do you think it means to be human?
You would ask a philosopher a question like this. You'll get probably a worthless answer. But what does it mean to be? I say part of it is you have to figure out what that question even means, right? And so how could I parse that in a way that makes sense to me? What does it mean to be human? Phrasing those terms, I can't answer that because mean to be, it's almost like mean to be is an ill-formed question, right? So see if you think about what kind of an answer you want and see if you can reframe that.
Okay. If an alien came to you and said, describe your species to me,
Yeah.
how would you describe us?
Okay. So in that sense, we're looking for a description or a definition in a way. Yeah, okay, good. So in that sense, you'd say it was a carbon-based organic being that has a complex system, a complex body that's adapted to the environment that it's in, but because of enhanced intellect in relation to all the other life forms on the planet, presumably, it's able to problem solve and tool use in a way that allows it to operate outside of its environmental niche, and then deal with more abstract problems in develop things such as aesthetic appreciation of things, which leads to, of course, art and culture, and technology is kind of a spin-off from that in a way, right? And so it leads to a complex mental life of a being that can interact with others, and but also has a complex ethical stand, which means that that interaction may not necessarily as desirable as we would like.
Sure, I like the answer. And to finish off, I could talk to you for hours, and I know this is going to set us off on maybe what could be an hour-long conversation as well. But do you have any inclination? Remote viewing was useful. It worked. The US government wouldn't give that up willingly. Do you think they still do it to this day?
So, I mean, that, as you can imagine, that's a frequent question. And some of my colleagues are quite disingenuous about it and give you all kinds of little hints and suggestions. They don't know any more than anybody else, sure. Right? I know the conditions under which it was done away with, and those indicate there's not much there left. That's because at the entire time the program existed, there were forces within the Army and then the military and the intelligence world that were very much supportive of it. Okay, senators, congressmen, generals, admirals, flag officers of all kinds. Then there were opponents within the military that thought we should never be involved in it. And everybody wants to blame it on evangelicals, right? And there was a small component of that, but there were plenty of materialists and physicalists, probably more of them that were opposed to this than any kind of religious problem, right? And they, so for example, the director of the CIA, when Congress gave the program from DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, to CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, the director of the time was hard over against remote viewing. He had nuclear physics training, was a strict physicalist, did not believe this stuff had any place in the military, that it was a fraud. And, I'm putting words in his mouth, I admit, but that's kind of the attitude it seemed he had, right? And he didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, Whether he actually had a role directly in killing it, I don't know, because his name is studiously withheld from the record, right? But it was clear that there was a cynical faction that wanted to get rid of it. Now, the CIA was glad to get the program because it came with 12 personnel billets, which at the time were precious because the Democratic presidency under Clinton and the Republican Congress, I talk about colluded, I think it was, in eviscerating the intelligence community at the time. They wanted to realize that peace dividend and be able to brag to their constituents because the war was over, they were able to recoup all this money that the military and the intelligence were going to use. It was an absolutely stupid thing to do. But that's a sidebar, right? Okay. Because of that, they were only too eager to kill the program, but keep those 12 billets that they could repurpose elsewhere, which is exactly what they did.
Interesting.
Now, there's one caveat. There might be one place where there is still an active program. I can tell you absolutely there's nothing in the military, in the military services, absolutely sure. I doubt there's anything in the CIA, for a reason I'm not going to go into because it takes a while, but I doubt there's anything there. But the National Security Agency that we used to call no such agency, right? The NSA had a program at the same time I and my colleagues were being trained because we knew their viewers. And I have never heard that they stopped doing it. You wouldn't necessarily hear it, but I never heard that they stopped doing it. And a whistleblower, I want to say about 10, 15 years ago, from, insider from the NSA, I don't remember his exact wording, but he pretty much suggested that they still had a program going. And so if there was an agency in the U.S. government that might be able to maintain this, I would say it was them. And I hope they did. I think that it's an important asset to our, lots of people have these conspiracy theory ideas about mind control and recruiting kids to be psychics and all that stuff. And it's all baloney. But, mind control isn't so much, as we've seen, but it had nothing to do with remote viewing, right? And I know there's people out there who swear they were recruited for the GATE program but until I see more evidence than just personal testimony, I don't believe that happened because I know it didn't happen within Stargate.
Paul, thank you so much.
You're welcome. This is fun.
Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on Spotify or on your chosen platform. If you could like, share, or subscribe, that would be very much appreciated. It helps us find our tribe. If you'd like to support the show and get access to a 1-hour live chat each month and early ad-free access, you can find us at Patreon. Just follow the link in the show notes or at our website, tobehumanshow.com. And feel free to reach out via the contact page or email at hello@tobehumanshow.com. As always, remember to be curious. The universe is bigger than we know.
What It Means to Be Human is a double-barrel production. This week's episode was produced by Roz Mugford and Dan Zetterstrom. Sound post-production by Parker Mosley with technical support from Dale Mugford. Our theme music is by Thunderbird.